increased its VAT, also value-added tax, by 3 percentage points in 2006.
Yep.
Your map started in 2008. Then
I think I said up until maybe I was wrong. Maybe it's my fault. I'll have to check.
I have a question about this minimum tax. At what income level would it start to be applied? Because if you have a 30% income tax for everybody, let's say in Germany, for instance, the
existing tax brackets.
A lot of people who do not pay taxes because their income is too low.
Can I just say, the principle is very simple. Forgive me for coming back on this. The principle is very simple. At whatever stage you engage the 40% tax bracket, then whatever your allowances, the minimum you could pay would be a 30% marginal rate. So it's not a 30% general rate. It's a marginal rate which applies, which is 10% lower than the upper bound, as it were, the upper rate.
Okay. And then I have a question to you about the unconditional basic income. Let's say it sounds great to me, and if everybody is free to refuse to do some work and so on, but that means obviously that enterprises or whoever wants to produce some outputs that the society needs will probably have to pay higher wages in order to attract still some workers. That means that in the end prices for these outputs will have to increase, and then you have to protect the basic minimum income against, if you have to protect the real value, you have to rise the nominal value of this income, and then you are entering a kind of spiral. How do you avoid that?
It's partly a comment and partly a query. It's been said twice so far today that there's an indication from opinion polls that people are willing to pay more tax. I have grave doubts that that's the case. I'm from experience, apart from anything else, that even not the last election, but the 2007 election, which appeared to us all to be the height of the boom, people were still looking for reductions in tax. And I'm just wondering, do we not need to dig below this issue of when people are asked, are you willing to pay more tax? What exactly are they saying when they say yes? Is there a question of trust involved here? I mean, is it that they say yes, but we don't trust that the extra tax we pay will be spent on health services or will be spent on this, that or the other? I think we need to go a bit deeper into this issue. I don't think we should assume that and say this is an accepted assumption that people are prepared to pay more tax. Therefore, we must persuade the politicians to go on put their election manifesto at the next election to increase more tax. I don't think you'll get the politicians to do that unless we can demonstrate, or at least add to it, what it is people will be prepared to pay more tax for and under what conditions.
Tom Healy, the NERI think tank. Just on a point of information, there was a reply to a parliamentary question about a week ago, 2 weeks ago, and just to provide the following information, because it hasn't been generally in the public domain up to now. In Ireland, approximately the top 5% of income earners, where you take income tax cases, we're looking there at about roughly 100,000, just over 100,000 earners. These would be households as well as jointly assessed couples and individuals. That would be the top 5% of income earners. They earn 20 billion in gross income, and the average effective tax rate, including USC, PRSI and income tax, for this group is 36%. So their marginal tax rate is probably somewhere around 52%, including PRSI and USC. That's our NIC, I should point out. But the average effective tax rate is 36%, and that's on the basis of a total gross income of 20 billion, which doesn't include employee contributions to pensions, but in any case. So there is plenty of scope to raise tax on high income groups in this country, And in my view, there is no excuse for cutting public expenditure other than to redirect public expenditure from areas of waste to areas of value. And the entire fiscal adjustment over the next 5 years in this country can be done on the basis of tax. So that is our choice. It's a domestic political choice, and one that can be done entirely within the Troika programme of deficit reduction, if you were to agree with that programme in terms of the timing, but that's another issue. So there's no excuse for cutting public expenditure, and these are the facts, and they deserve to be known and discussed.
Let me take, first of all, the point on willing to pay more tax. A majority of people, it depends on the nature of the question. If you ask most people, quite probably in the UK as well, I think I've seen this sort of thing, but I can't be absolutely sure. Do they want higher taxes? The majority say no. If you ask them, do they want fairer taxes? A large majority say yes. So where are you? I mean, you can ask the question 50 different ways. There does seem to be a perception that the taxation system as it stands is unfair. But most people, many people, don't understand the difference between marginal rates and average rates, much less effective rates and nominal rates. So, you know, there's a lot of economic education to be done, amongst other things, which normally would have been done by trade unions if we had any trade unions left. I'm old enough to, be of a generation that remembers when we had trade unions, summer schools and whatever, but that has very largely disappeared in the UK. Top 5% of the gentleman who was talking about the effective rate of tax on the top 5% being 36%. Is very important. And yes, you're quite right. The question is, can you actually get that tax out of them? I mean, that's one of the reasons for the notion that there should be minimum bounds, a minimal lower bound on tax rates as well as upper tax rates. For example, that goes to the much wider question of what is the optimal tax rate. Now, I tend to be professionally biased towards the UK. So I've read the Institute of Fiscal Studies, the IFS, issued a very long-winded, multi-volume report some months ago, chaired by Jim Mirrlees. Jim Mirrlees, I used to know a million years ago. We cooperated in an entirely different thing. But Jim Mirrlees believes in the Laffer curve. The Laffer curve, as all of you, I'm sure, will know, or most of you, is that funny thing drawn on a serviette, on a paper napkin in the United States by a then obscure professor educated at Chicago, which said, after some rate on the higher the tax rate, the less you collect. Now, there's some evidence from behavioral relationship. The higher the tax rate, the less you collect. But that behavioral relationship, as Piketty and Saints and various others have pointed out very clearly, there's a slew of recent articles on this, that behavioral relationship is dominated by tax avoidance. The reason, would you believe, the reason the Conservatives cut top rate of tax from 50% to 45% is because the Mirrlees report had talked about 47% being the top of the Laffer curve. Coincidence there. The reason you can even speak of a top of the Laffer curve, what you mean when you talk about it, is the opportunities for tax avoidance. Thomas Piketty himself said, bring back a 70% rate of income tax. Piketty and Saints have said it very clearly, separately and together. So there we are. If you could do something about tax avoidance, which we can, I'm not the person to speak on it. I'm not an expert on tax avoidance, but John Christensen, Richard Murphy, a slew of other people are. you could really seriously reduce this behavioural effect and knock out this whole argument about there being such a thing as a Laffer curve. Sorry, I think I missed out one point there. Forgive me if I did.
Pauline, do you want to comment? No. Okay. I think if some higher taxes were going to something very transparent, like a citizen's dividend or the public goods that George was talking about, people might be so willing to pay higher taxes. It might be useful to put that question to the people in the room. Would anyone like to comment on the question that Prunchi's put to us? There's Robin and there's somebody behind you. So
I've been here to a couple of these conferences, and I see the deciles being put up, and I see the difference. Okay, and everybody can understand that graph. Now, maybe not everybody the first time they see it understands what it means, but I think it's a fairly straightforward graph to see. And I thought it would be very interesting if a political party was to put up that graph and run for an election based on what kind of curve they would like to see. Because I think it would be very hard for... See, my personal opinion is that the Conservative parties tend to feel that income inequality drives growth. And a lot of economists believe this as well, that it's all about if you create an incentive. So in other words, if you can get rich quickly, and if there's a large difference between the poorer people in society and the richer people, then that drives growth. And I actually think that that's what a lot of the Conservative political parties believe. But I think it would be very hard to get votes based on that, because the people in the top 10%, well, it's quite clear they'll happily vote for a party that wants to see them with a very low rate of tax and a very high income. But the majority of the people will be down that curve, and they won't vote for parties that are aiming for a flat. They will vote for parties that are aiming for a flatter curve. So the majority of people, I think, will vote for parties that will have progressive taxation systems. And after 5 years in government or 4 years in government, that can be tested as well. So, I mean, that's something that political parties could try to do, because oftentimes political debates or political manifestos are run on, we're going to do this with the health system, or we're going to have a 40% tax. Nobody understands these things. Like, it's very hard for ordinary people to kind of get a general picture of what society is going to look like if we have 45% tax or if we have 60% tax. So I think that's something that could be looked at, maybe, that people could try to run for election based on that graph.
As George says, the problem is that we always let the question be put in Ireland in the undifferentiated manner of saying, do you want to pay more tax or not? The issue is to change the terms of the debate to how progressive is the taxation system. And then you can start to introduce all sorts of other arguments, which are the spread level arguments about the positive benefits of a progressive taxation system in reducing inequalities, and therefore assisting with dealing with other social problems. And you can also introduce other points, for example, the importance of punitive levels of taxation to stop rent-seeking. We talked about rent-seeking this morning by people in position to play the market for themselves, big figures in big finance corporations. If their remuneration committees know that the rate of tax they will suffer is something like 80%, they won't pay them those kind of ridiculous wages, those ridiculous salaries. But those are the issues that we're not talking about, because we allow ourselves to be caught on a right-wing argument about more or less tax, as if everybody paid the same, and as if there was this thing called the tax man who has some kind of punitive desire to get inside your pocket. We've allowed the right to define the whole language of taxation right across Europe in a way we need to change.
From the New Economics Foundation, just on that issue of why people don't support, or sometimes in polls say they don't want more taxation, is that just as people at the top don't know what people are being paid below, people at the bottom, everyone else in society doesn't realise how much people are getting paid at the top, and they think they're going to be included in paying more taxes when it's really not about them. And actually, on the fairness question of people, they did this experiment in the US where they showed pictures of different distributions, so fairer distributions. So, and even in the US, people pointed to the Swedish distribution of income and wanted that. And when they looked at the American one, they didn't realise it was the American one. They thought that was really unfair. So there is something about how politicians sell that. And just on the choice of why we don't go for tax also is people are scared that that the rich won't pay. And one of the reasons that the rich hide their money and potentially don't pay is because one of the effects of inequality, they live very different lives. They don't see the point of giving back. They don't know about kind of the perils in the lives that everyone lives. So this is really, it's kind of a vicious cycle, because it's an outcome of inequality that we see, that people at the top aren't willing to kind of, or the solidarity isn't there. That was just a comment, sorry. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more?
Jerry Hughes, Trinity College, Dublin. On the issue of questions to people about whether they're willing to pay more tax, I think it very much depends on the way in which you present that choice to people. A big issue here has been paying for long-term care. And about 5 or 6 years ago, when I was working with the ESRI, we undertook a study of people's preferences in relation to paying for that care. And we offered people a range of choices, whether it should be paid by increases in VAT, increases in income tax, or through the social insurance system. And we explored with people, how much more would you be willing to pay for this kind of care, which all of us may, at the end of our days, require. So people indicated that they were willing to pay essentially an earmarked tax in relation to the provision of those services. But there were certainly limits in most people's minds on how much more they were willing to pay. But I think the basis, that research indicates that there is a willingness to increase taxation, to pay for name services, provided the taxation is fair.